You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Accountability is more than a philosophical principle. It is a governance requirement, demanding that organizations be able to prove, not just claim, that their data processing practices align with privacy obligations. At its core, accountability requires demonstrable evidence, meaning durable records, validated controls, and documented decisions that withstand regulatory or legal scrutiny. This is particularly important in privacy because laws often emphasize outcomes rather than prescriptive steps. Organizations are expected to show they followed a reasonable, defensible process. For exam candidates, the key concept is demonstration. Saying, "we comply," is not enough. Regulators, auditors, and courts will look for proof in the form of policies, training records, assessments, and logs. Scenarios may test whether oral assurances are sufficient, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing accountability as evidence-driven governance highlights that compliance requires structured documentation, transparent processes, and defensible diligence at every level of operations. Accountability models can be defined as structured frameworks that connect privacy program governance with risk management systems. These models integrate leadership oversight, documented processes, control testing, and continuous improvement cycles into a cohesive system. Rather than treating privacy as an isolated compliance activity, accountability models embed privacy into enterprise risk management, aligning it with broader governance disciplines such as financial controls and operational resilience. For exam candidates, the key lesson is linkage. Accountability must connect program governance with risk registers, metrics, and reporting mechanisms that feed executive and board decision-making. Scenarios may test whether accountability can exist without integration into risk management, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this underscores that accountability models transform privacy from a siloed legal requirement into a structured, auditable program that demonstrates foresight, proportionality, and organizational maturity. Evidence-based compliance sits at the heart of accountability by ensuring that policies, standards, and procedures are documented and accessible. Policies define commitments, standards set measurable requirements, and procedures provide detailed instructions for execution. Documentation creates consistency and supports auditability. Staff know what to follow, and auditors know what to test. For learners, the key concept is layering. Evidence must connect high-level principles to operational practices. For example, a privacy policy promising timely incident response must be backed by a standard requiring specific response times and a procedure describing how incident commanders act. On the exam, scenarios may test whether policy statements alone prove compliance, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that accountability requires durable, detailed documentation bridging commitments with day-to-day actions, ensuring consistency and defensibility in regulatory reviews. Enterprise privacy risk assessments are another cornerstone of accountability. They involve structured methods such as heat maps, scoring systems, or maturity models to evaluate how personal data exposures affect confidentiality, integrity, and availability. A centralized risk register consolidates findings across the enterprise, making it easier to prioritize remediation and track residual risk over time. For exam candidates, the key terms are centralization and prioritization. Scenarios may test whether risk assessments can remain informal, with the correct recognition being no formal documentation is expected. Recognizing this illustrates how accountability transforms risk identification into actionable governance. Risk registers not only highlight exposures but also record decisions, showing regulators that leadership considered risks, made proportionate choices, and aligned mitigation strategies with organizational resources and obligations. Roles and responsibilities must be clearly mapped to privacy tasks to prevent gaps or overlaps in execution. A common tool is RACI mapping, which identifies who is responsible for completing work, who is accountable for outcomes, who must be consulted during execution, and who must be informed of progress. Applying RACI to privacy tasks, such as handling data subject requests, reviewing third-party contracts, or responding to incidents, clarifies accountability chains and ensures consistency. For learners, the key concept is role clarity. On the exam, scenarios may test whether privacy accountability can rest entirely in IT, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that accountability requires distributed ownership, with legal, compliance, IT, HR, and business units all having defined responsibilities documented and rehearsed to support defensible privacy operations. Policy hierarchy alignment ensures that enterprise privacy policies, control standards, and procedural playbooks reinforce one another. At the top, enterprise policy reflects board-level commitments. Mid-level standards translate commitments into measurable requirements, such as encryption mandates or retention limits. At the operational level, playbooks and runbooks guide staff through daily execution. Without alignment, contradictions can arise, such as policies promising strict retention limits while procedures allow exceptions without documentation. For exam candidates, the key lesson is consistency. Scenarios may test whether policy conflicts undermine accountability, with the correct recognition being yes. Recognizing this illustrates that accountability requires a coherent hierarchy, where commitments cascade seamlessly into enforceable controls and practical guidance, ensuring alignment across strategic, tactical, and operational levels of the privacy program. Data protection assessments, whether mandated by state laws or performed voluntarily as privacy impact assessments, provide documented proof that risks were identified and mitigated before launching or modifying processing activities. These assessments capture purposes, legal bases, risks, and safeguards, ensuring compliance by design. For exam purposes, the key terms are scope and defensibility. Scenarios may test whether assessments are optional in high-risk processing, with the correct recognition being no. They are required by law in many cases. Recognizing this emphasizes that accountability is not reactive but proactive, demanding assessments before data use begins. Properly documented assessments provide durable evidence regulators can review, showing that organizations anticipated risks and implemented safeguards, reinforcing accountability throughout the lifecycle of projects and processing activities. Workforce training records further demonstrate diligence by proving not only that programs exist, but that employees actually completed them. Attestations confirm acknowledgement of responsibilities, while version control ensures staff are trained on current content. Training curricula are updated to reflect regulatory changes or emerging threats, and completion metrics are documented to provide evidence in audits. For exam candidates, the key concept is proof of diligence. Scenarios may test whether annual reminders alone demonstrate compliance, with the correct recognition being no evidence of participation and comprehension is required. Recognizing this highlights that accountability requires tangible records of workforce preparation, showing regulators that training is not symbolic but actively managed, updated, and tied to documented participation across the organization. Third-party due diligence files provide accountability for outsourced processing. These files include evidence of vendor assessments, such as SOC 2 reports, ISO 27001 certifications, penetration test results, or completed questionnaires. They also include documented risk tiering decisions, contract reviews, and remediation steps. For exam candidates, the key concept is defensibility. Organizations must prove they validated vendor claims rather than accepting assurances. Scenarios may test whether completed questionnaires without evidence suffice, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that accountability extends into the supply chain, requiring documented diligence, contractual controls, and periodic oversight of vendors, ensuring external partners are governed with the same rigor applied internally. Technical control baselines provide evidence that safeguards are mapped proportionately to data classifications. For example, restricted data may require multi-factor authentication, encryption at rest, and continuous monitoring, while internal-only data may require fewer measures. Baselines connect classification systems with security controls, ensuring protections align with sensitivity. For exam candidates, the key concept is proportionality. Scenarios may test whether all data must have identical protections, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this illustrates that accountability demands structured mapping. Organizations must show that controls were chosen rationally and proportionately, with documented baselines proving that sensitive data receives the strongest protections while lower-tier data is still protected adequately. Metrics and reporting ensure privacy programs are continuously monitored and improved. Key performance indicators measure program effectiveness, such as data subject request completion times, while key risk indicators highlight exposures, such as unremediated vendor findings. Dashboards consolidate metrics into accessible views for executives, making oversight transparent. For exam candidates, the key lesson is measurability. Scenarios may test whether qualitative observations alone suffice, with the correct recognition being no quantitative metrics are expected. Recognizing this highlights that accountability requires structured reporting to leadership, enabling informed governance decisions, resource allocation, and continuous improvement cycles that are transparent, documented, and defensible to regulators. Internal audits and independent assessments validate whether controls operate as intended. Internal teams test compliance, while independent third parties provide external assurance. Management responses document how findings are addressed, creating a closed loop of discovery, remediation, and verification. For exam candidates, the key concept is validation. Scenarios may test whether self-reporting suffices as proof of compliance, with the correct recognition being no independent validation is expected. Recognizing this illustrates that accountability cannot rely on trust alone. It requires objective testing and documented management responses, proving that organizations do more than identify weaknesses. They fix them systematically and transparently, reinforcing their compliance posture. Executive governance reinforces accountability by ensuring privacy is overseen at the highest levels. Management reviews track program performance, board reports integrate privacy into enterprise risk oversight, and documented decisions prove that leadership weighed risks and allocated resources appropriately. For exam candidates, the key concept is governance evidence. Scenarios may test whether board awareness of privacy risks is optional, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that accountability requires executive engagement, with durable records of discussions, approvals, and decisions showing regulators and stakeholders that privacy is prioritized strategically, not treated as a technical or operational afterthought. Privacy by design lifecycle checkpoints embed accountability into intake, change, and release processes. New projects, system changes, and product launches must pass privacy assessments before proceeding, ensuring safeguards are considered upfront. Documented checkpoints provide evidence that risks were identified and addressed early, reinforcing accountability. For exam purposes, the key concept is life cycle embedding. Scenarios may test whether privacy reviews can be deferred until after launch, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this emphasizes that accountability requires proactive integration, demonstrating that compliance and risk considerations were systematically addressed throughout development and change management cycles. Incident readiness evidence completes the accountability model by proving organizations prepared before breaches occur. This includes summaries of tabletop exercises, role definitions for incident response teams, and pre-approved communication templates. Such evidence shows regulators that organizations were not improvising, but had structured plans in place. For exam candidates, the key term is preparedness. Scenarios may test whether readiness evidence is optional, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that accountability requires defensible preparation, demonstrating that organizations anticipated incidents, rehearsed responses, and created documented artifacts to support timely, compliant, and transparent actions when real crises arise. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Documenting workflows and turnaround metrics for data subject rights requests is a critical way organizations demonstrate accountability. Rights such as access, deletion, correction, portability, and opt-out must not only be fulfilled but fulfilled within statutory timelines. An accountability model requires organizations to log each request, track its status, and document the resolution. Metrics such as average completion time and percentage of requests closed within legal deadlines provide measurable proof of compliance. For exam candidates, the key concept is traceability. Every request must have a documented life cycle from intake to closure. Scenarios may test whether verbal confirmation of compliance suffices, with the correct recognition being no auditable evidence is required. Recognizing this ensures candidates understand that accountability means being able to produce workflow diagrams, metrics, and records that prove rights are honored consistently, transparently, and within regulatory expectations. Consent and preference management logs provide additional accountability by demonstrating lawful bases for processing and respecting individual choices. Logs record when and how consent was captured, whether online, via mobile, or in person, and they track any subsequent withdrawals or updates. Preference management ensures opt-ins for marketing or opt-outs from targeted advertising are consistently honored across systems. Accountability requires that these logs are tamper-resistant and auditable, providing clear proof of when consent was obtained and under what conditions. For exam purposes, the key lesson is persistence. Consent records must be maintained as long as processing continues. Scenarios may test whether expired or undocumented consent remains valid, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that accountability is operationalized through durable, verifiable consent logs that prove compliance with both consumer expectations and statutory requirements. Transparency artifacts such as archived privacy notices, change logs, and targeting rationales provide a visible record of what organizations told consumers and when. Accountability requires being able to show regulators which notice version was active at the time of a consumer's data collection. Change logs document updates such as new categories of data sharing or revised retention periods, providing evidence of transparency. Audience targeting rationales explain why particular groups were reached with communications or advertising, preventing hidden discrimination or misuse. For exam candidates, the key concept is historical defensibility. Scenarios may test whether current privacy notices suffice to explain past practices, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this underscores that accountability depends on retaining records of transparency, ensuring organizations can defend disclosures and prove that consumers were properly informed at every point in time. Records management links accountability to lifecycle governance. Retention schedules specify how long data is stored. Legal hold procedures pause deletion for litigation, and verification logs confirm that deletion actually occurred. This linkage proves that commitments in privacy notices and contracts are operationalized. For exam candidates, the key concept is life cycle proof. Scenarios may test whether stated retention periods without deletion logs demonstrate compliance, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this illustrates that accountability requires tangible evidence that data is not just scheduled for deletion but is actually destroyed or anonymized, with verifiable documentation available for regulators or auditors who demand proof that data lifecycle obligations are consistently enforced. Identity and access management artifacts provide evidence that only appropriate users had access to sensitive information. Least privilege reviews ensure permissions match job roles, while entitlement recertifications confirm access lists are updated regularly. Logs must show changes, approvals, and removals. For learners, the key concept is restriction evidence. Accountability requires proving that safeguards existed not just in principle but in daily practice. On the exam, scenarios may test whether assigning access without periodic review suffices, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that accountability demands systematic IAM governance, ensuring data access is minimized, documented, and continuously validated through recertification and oversight. Cryptography governance reinforces accountability by showing that encryption and key management are structured and defensible. Documentation should prove that encryption keys are rotated regularly, escrowed securely, and retired when obsolete. Key lifecycle management ensures that sensitive data remains protected throughout its storage and transfer. For exam candidates, the key lesson is managed assurance. Encryption without governance cannot prove compliance. Scenarios may test whether using encryption alone satisfies accountability, with the correct recognition being no documented governance is required. Recognizing this highlights that accountability depends on lifecycle records, showing regulators and auditors not only that cryptographic protections exist but that they are actively managed with discipline and control. Breach decision memoranda capture the reasoning behind notification choices, providing one of the clearest examples of accountability. These memoranda record the facts of the incident, the legal definitions applied, the risk assessment findings, and the final decision on notification. They serve as evidence that the organization conducted structured analysis rather than arbitrary judgments. For exam candidates, the key concept is defensible reasoning. Scenarios may test whether undocumented breach decisions satisfy accountability, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that regulators expect written analysis showing how determinations were reached. Memoranda transform breach response from reactive decisions into accountable governance, proving that legal, operational, and risk considerations were carefully balanced and documented. Cross-border transfer files are critical artifacts in demonstrating accountability for international data sharing. These files should include executed standard contractual clauses, binding corporate rules approvals, or data privacy framework certifications. Supplementary safeguards, such as encryption or access limitations, must also be documented. For exam candidates, the key concept is legal grounding. Accountability requires evidence that transfers rest on recognized legal bases. Scenarios may test whether undocumented transfers meet accountability standards, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this underscores that cross-border accountability demands durable records. Without them, organizations cannot prove compliance, leaving them exposed to regulatory penalties or suspension of international data flows. Children's data handling evidence provides proof of compliance with COPPA and state-level youth privacy statutes. Documentation must include parental consent logs, content of notices provided to guardians, and records of data use restrictions. Accountability requires showing that children's data was collected only with proper consent and used solely for declared, lawful purposes. For exam candidates, the key lesson is heightened diligence. Children's data demands stricter evidence. Scenarios may test whether implied consent suffices, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this emphasizes that accountability models must include specialized artifacts for vulnerable populations, ensuring organizations demonstrate diligence and compliance that goes beyond standard obligations for general personal data. Biometric governance artifacts reinforce accountability in high-risk processing contexts. Organizations must maintain consent records, retention schedules, and system access logs specific to biometric identifiers like fingerprints or facial recognition templates. Policy should outline why biometric data is collected, how it is protected, and when it will be deleted. For exam purposes, the key terms are consent and retention. Scenarios may test whether biometric data can be retained indefinitely, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that accountability requires heightened evidence for biometric processing, ensuring organizations can prove compliance with stringent statutes that impose explicit obligations around collection, retention, and security of sensitive biometric information. Automated decision-making documentation ensures accountability for algorithm-driven outcomes. Organizations must demonstrate governance frameworks, bias testing results, and human-in-the-loop checkpoints for sensitive decisions like hiring, lending, or insurance. These artifacts provide evidence that automation was not deployed recklessly, but with oversight, fairness, and transparency. For exam candidates, the key lesson is algorithmic accountability. Scenarios may test whether automated systems can operate without documentation, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that accountability requires proof of testing, monitoring, and human review, ensuring regulators and consumers can trust that automated decisions are explainable, justifiable, and aligned with ethical and legal standards. Corrective and preventive action tracking, often called CAPA, provides accountability for resolving issues. Each CAPA record must document the root cause of a problem, the remediation steps taken, verification results, and any preventative measures introduced to avoid recurrence. For exam candidates, the key concept is closed-loop evidence. Scenarios may test whether identifying problems without remediation suffices, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this emphasizes that accountability requires not only discovering issues but also documenting their closure, proving that weaknesses were addressed, verified, and converted into learning opportunities that strengthen the privacy program over time. Third-party assurance letters, audit scopes, and remediation statuses create accountability in the supply chain. Vendors and sub-processors must provide evidence of compliance through audits or certifications, and remediation of any findings must be documented. Assurance letters formalize commitments, while audit reports validate actual practices. For exam candidates, the key lesson is extended accountability. Organizations remain responsible for vendor compliance. Scenarios may test whether vendors' word alone suffices, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this underscores that accountability extends outward, requiring durable evidence from partners to ensure that outsourced processing aligns with organizational and regulatory expectations. Certifications, attestations, and limitations noted in accountability records prevent overstating compliance. Certifications, such as ISO 27701, provide formal recognition of program maturity, while attestations confirm adherence to specific standards. However, accountability also requires disclosing scope limitations, such as geographic coverage or excluded systems, to avoid misleading claims. For exam candidates, the key concept is transparency and representation. Scenarios may test whether partial certifications can be advertised as full coverage, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that accountability is not only about producing evidence but also about representing compliance honestly, acknowledging both achievements and limitations to maintain regulatory trust and stakeholder credibility. By assembling durable records, maintaining objective metrics, and integrating independent verification, accountability models transform compliance from claims into proof. For exam candidates, the synthesis is clear. Accountability means organizations can produce evidence at any time, showing policies, decisions, safeguards, and responses were deliberate, documented, and defensible. Recognizing this highlights that accountability is the thread tying governance, risk, and privacy together, ensuring programs can withstand external scrutiny while fostering trust with regulators, consumers, and business partners. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.